Hi, and welcome to Pirates of Savannah, Chapter 3. Please remember, if you'd like a commercial-free version of this, you can purchase it and support me, the author, at www.lupoliink.com. Enjoy Chapter 3.
Chapter 3 Pirates Ahoy! All hands were madly scrambling and manning the stations. Patrick was frightened. He had hardly done any battle drills. Nervousness could be seen in the eyes of all the new crew members, green sailors who had only performed some basic war maneuvers. They all questioned their abilities in real action. The approaching ship was still very far away and cresting the horizon, but it was plain to see from her mirroring movements the Robin was being pursued. Using his folding spyglass, the captain could tell it was a sloop about the same size as the Robin, with one large mast and a smaller secondary mast. The mystery sloop was gaining on the Robin, but not by much. Most pirate ships stayed within a few days' sail of the coast and traveled light to increase their speed. These ships were stripped down to the essentials and modified for speed, but one thing pirates did not reduce was the size of the crews or cannons. Whereas the Robin's complement was 50 souls, a pirate ship of the same size would have as much as 200 men. The Robin's crew was keenly aware of this fact and knew if the ship was boarded, all would be lost. Captain Gibbons finally came to life in an authoritative role, usurping the quartermaster's role. Until now, Mr. Mandrick was in charge of all the ship's daily activities, but when danger was around, the captain ran everything with supreme authoritative power. Captain Gibbons barked a stream of orders, and the crew quickly fell into a sort of organized chaos. The rigger men were quickly dancing high on the mast, while the sailors were wrestling the line and tacking, trying desperately to get full sail. Mr. McLean shouted at Patrick to get under deck and prepare. Patrick froze, and McLean saw the fear in his wide eyes. "Get a hold of yourself, man. Focus on your duties, and you'll be fine." Patrick nodded and rushed below the deck with Mr. McLean. While rushing below deck, the master carpenter/surgeon hastily explained what was expected of Patrick. "You'll heat this tar up and oak 'em and be ready to patch the holes. The rest of the crew, not fighting or sailing, will be helping you peg down the spare planks and bale water. After the fighting is over, the real fun begins and we start treating the dying." Patrick knew he should be paying close attention to McLean's words, but horrible visions of his head hanging off the mystery sloop's bowsprit kept invading his mind. Back topside, the sun was quickly being swallowed by the sea, and it was becoming hard to make out the pursuing ship in the long shadows in the water. Captain Gibbons yelled at Mr. Mandrick, "Darken the ship and make haste. All the lights will be extinguished immediately, and no sailor will talk over the level of a hummingbird or I'll have his tongue." "Aye, Captain." Quartermaster confirmed with his orders. "I will blacken this ship like nightfall, sir." The moon was now half waxed, and with good eyes one could make out the dark shadow of a ship against the shimmering blue reflections of the moonlight. Even with his spyglass, the captain could not make out the style of the rigging to determine its weakness. Captain Gibbons attempted hard turns and angles to lose the pursuing ship in the darkness. The Robin desperately zigzagged for hours in hopes that the pursuing ship would be lost in the darkness. The deck crew worked silently, only occasionally speaking in hushed tones as they wrestled with keeping the sails full. Every so often, a stream of Irish-accented obscenities would drift down from the riggings, cracking the silence. Seamus did not seem to understand the concept of a hushed voice, and the sounds of the cursing would carry across the black water. Barely keeping his temper, Mr. Mandrick reminded the Irish fool to control himself or his tongue would be nailed to the mast. 2 hours after sunset, the Robin was rewarded by a bit of luck as a bellow of clouds rolled in, covering the moon in starlight. The overcast blessedly lasted until sunrise. The deck crew was drenched with sweat as they responded to the captain's every order. The captain took the Robin hard off course in hopes that it would be lost to the pursuing ship's sight come morning. The approaching vessel had also darkened herself and was lost to the black of the night. Both ships would wait until sunrise to see the results of the seafaring chess battle of strategy. The Robin's crew waited in paralyzed fear as the sun slowly overtook the water. The first ray caught the water and in minutes lit up the sky. The captain and the crow's nest lookout were shouting back and forth at each other. The lookout now was very sick and had vomited bile all night into the barrel he was standing in. The sea's sickening motion was strongly amplified in the crow's nest, and very few sailors could take more than a few minutes, let alone an entire night's watch. The crow's nest was commonly employed as a punishment device by Mr. Mandrick for disobedient sailors. The lookout, sickly and green, shouted weakly, "Captain Gibbons, I can't find her anywhere. I think you side-goggled her." Indeed, the captain did outflank the mystery ship and could not find her on the horizon. A great shout of joy went through the crew, but the captain sternly warned his crew, "Stay focused, gentlemen, and stay on course." Captain Gibbons then ordered the sailing master to join him on the poop deck. On the highest deck of the ship, the sailing master pulled out an antique astrolabe, held it up into the sun, and stared. He then turned his back to the sun and held up a Davis backstaff, determining the altitude of the sun. Then the practically blind man pulled out his old quadrant and determined the Robin's longitude by staring directly into the sun with it. With extreme caution, the sailing master gingerly removed the sextant from its protective case. The sailing master knew it was the most valuable item on the ship, and if it ever dropped, the sextant would be ruined, and he would be punished harshly. Because of this, he always attached the sextant to a makeshift lanyard around his neck for safety. "How far off a course are we now?" Captain Gibbons questioned. "How many days did I just add to our journey?" As with almost all sailing masters, his eyes were filled with white, cloudy fluid and could barely see in the daylight. He held aloft the sextant and sighted the sun and the horizon. He looked through a telescope that dropped the shade glass in place, and he stared directly into the sun. He knew his eyes would burn and itch for hours later for this daytime reading, but he also knew the captain needed it quickly. He would have preferred to wait till the night, relying on the stars for better accuracy, but the grave circumstances demanded a daytime reading. The sailing master then took a reading with the sundial and compass. He then did a dance, consulting his charts and instruments repeatedly. Never trusting just one instrument, he utilized a combination of old and new navigation technology. After a few minutes of studying, he looked at the captain with his cloudy white eyes and reported calmly, "Captain, we be about 3 days off course now, but I think I can plot a new course around open waters and catch some of the time up." "Very good, sir," Captain Gibbons barked. "Get to plotting." The captain knew how risky it was to chart straight across the open ocean and not island and coast hop, but he feared the pirates more than the storms right now. The crew settled into an uneasy state of alert, with all eyes continuously fixed on the horizon. The captain finally relieved the seasick lookout and gave him time to sleep, and slowly the crew returned to their normal watches. With no sight of the pursuing ship to be seen, Captain Gibbons knew that if he could get just a few more days out to open waters, the Robin would be safe. They followed the sailing master's course throughout the day, and the seas became choppy. As the sun began to set, the seas became even more uneasy and the sky filled with menacing gray clouds. Angry winds filled the sails and started bending the mast sideways until a steady rhythm of rocking was established. Patrick was woke up by the surgeon's chest violently sliding into the hammock. The hammock was swinging wildly, and Patrick abandoned it as fast as he could. The scared man was unnerved as heavy items shuffled across the floor as the ship careened. He had taken to sea life fairly well, but had not yet earned his sea legs. Until now, he had only felt mildly uncomfortable by the rocking of the sea, but now he was rapidly getting sick. Curiosity took him up to deckside to see if they were under attack. As he came through the hatch, he was pelted by the stinging rain. The deck crews had just pulled the sails down and were tying down everything on the deck. The crew screamed orders at each other through the howling wind. A sailor was moaning like a prophet of doom that crossing the ocean during the late spring was dangerous. Rain came down in blinding sideways sheets, and Patrick could only see a short distance around the ship, and the nightfall was not helping. Against the judgment of the captain, the quartermaster was frantically dropping the anchor to no avail. They were now in deep waters, and the anchor would find no home. Patrick realized very quickly that things had just turned treacherous for the Robin. The wheel was spinning wildly as the ship rocked back and forth and started to spin in a circle. Two men grabbed the wheel in an attempt to steady her, but even with their collective strength, they could not hold on. Isaac seemed to materialize out of the darkness and rain and grabbed the spinning wheel. The three men were joined by the captain, and they collectively slowed the out-of-control helm. A scream came from the wooden rudder, but it held together. For the rest of the pitch-black night, the crew wrestled with the storm to stay afloat. The quartermaster soon realized what a horrible mistake it was to try and drop anchor, and it caused the Robin to list wildly. In less than an hour, a frenzied crew managed to ratchet the anchor back in place. While struggling against the wheel and the angry sea, Isaac was arguing with one of the sailors holding the wheel when a giant wave crashed over them. When Isaac opened his eyes, the man simply vanished. Isaac scanned the deck and found the lost man nowhere. "Man overboard!" Isaac screamed as the crew began to echo the call. Men scrambled to help Isaac with the wheel, while others ran to the rail to scan the black waters. A voice desperately screaming for help could be heard from below, but he could not be found in the blackness. Fortunately for the man in the drink, flashes of lightning cracked, illuminating the dark waters, and he was spotted on the starboard side. The crew quickly threw down a rope to a man who was fighting desperately to stay afloat. The sailors missed the throw repeatedly. He was out of reach of the line, but then Seamus tried, and he threw the rope so straight it hit the flailing man in the face. The sinking man quickly tied the wet rope under his arms and around his chest. A wave rose up and swallowed the man. He sank into the dark and out of sight. The Robin's bow then swung wildly and slammed into the man. As the deck crew pulled the rope, a limp body rose up out of the water. The body was unceremoniously dragged up the starboard wall and onto the deck. The saved man was groaning and his eyes could not focus. "Crewman Willis," Mandrake called out. "Take this man down and see to him." The remaining sailors frantically tied themselves to a rope, which was lashed to a tall mast for safety. Patrick was ordered to return below deck just as they battened down the hatches. Endless screams and shuffling could be heard from the deck above. Patrick tried to focus on his patient, but the man passed out on the hammock and was snoring. The surgeon's mate joined most of the crew below in rotating moments of fear and vomiting in the dark. He mustered his constitution and then took to his bilge pump duties. The night was long and frightening, and the man kept their minds off dying by bailing bucket after bucket of water that had seeped in from the heavy rain. The ship was finally settling down, and the hatches were opened. The sun would be rising soon, but it was still raining and pitch black. The waters had finally settled, and the ship was no longer rocking wildly. The constant state of fear had kept the exhausted crew up all night. Patrick wanted to escape the vomit smells from below, so he went up topside. He saw the dead, tired crew still tied to the mast on long ropes as they performed their duties sluggishly. Finally, the clouds became patchy and a little moonlight could be seen dancing on the water. Patrick walked to the railing, stretching his arms over his head. yawned, and looked out across the water. Moonlight was slowly becoming daylight, and the water illuminated quickly. Patrick's eyes grew with fear as he saw the silhouette of the sloop become visible 500 yards off the larboard side. He screamed in a panicked voice, "Captain! Pirates! Larboard side!" The deck immediately sprang to life with activity, shouts, and bell ringing. "Battle stations," the quartermaster commanded in his awkward, slow, broken Greek accent. "Be ye ready on the cannons." Captain Gibbons hurried to get the sails up on the modified galleon. Most private captains modify their ships to their taste, and the Robin was no exception, sporting fore and aft jib sails as well. The pursuing ship was easier to see now, and it was more of a large coastal-style sloop with one large mast and a smaller aft mast. The pirate ship was also taken off guard and was quickly raising its massive sail as well. The storm had unknowingly brought the two vessels together in the night. It would be a foot race to see whose crew could catch the wind first. An exhausted Captain Gibbons immediately took the helm. He steered the ship the best he could away from the pirates, still getting full sail. The wind was helping the Robin, but unfortunately was also giving advantage to the mystery vessel. Captain Gibbons was still unsure if this vessel in chase was an English privateer, so he ordered his true colors to be flown. The yellow jack was pulled down and replaced with the English jack. Gibbons waited nervously as he watched the mast of the pursuing ship. The captain felt his heart sink as the enemy vessel did not slow or even raise a jack. For a brief moment, Captain Gibbons considered giving the order to jettison all the extra weight to gain speed. He realized this far out to sea, with the size of this crew, they would be dealt a slow death of starvation and thirst if their supplies were abandoned. They would have to stay and fight. It was a grim thought that made Gibbons uneasy. The quartermaster yelled for silence, and the crew listened attentively. Faint echoes rode out across the water. The Greek listened for a moment, and then muttered under his breath, "God damn it, that Spaniard piss they be dribbling out their mouths." He then yelled, reporting to Gibbons, "Spanish privateers, Captain. I will see the crew be ready for fighting." Captain Gibbons did have some knowledge that gave him a little bit of upper hand in this chess match. He knew most privateers relied on fear and not actual force. It was too costly and not too wise to have holes blown into the prize you were trying to take. The captain calculated they would not shoot first. They would try to cower the Robin into surrender. The Spanish might take on his crew, but Gibbons was well aware that captured captains were usually killed or ransomed. Either way, this would not end well for his skin. The Spanish sloop was now closing the distance. With his spyglass, the captain could see over 100 armed men on the decks, preparing to fight. The captain knew his ship was outmanned and outgunned. The Robin only had 6-carriage-style French garrison guns that actually worked. They were poorly retrofitted on the deck and below. The Robin's cannons rested on a Vauban marine carriage, so they would not fly backwards off the deck when fired. Captain Gibbons' plan was to bring the Spanish sloop as close as possible and cripple the sails with the Robin's smaller cannons. A fake surrender would be staged to bring the Spanish close. Mandrake instructed all the men on their deck to raise their arms in the air as the Spanish vessel closed in tight. The ships were now turning broadside to each other, as the Spanish crew could be seen preparing their grappling hooks to throw into the Robin's rigging. Captain Gibbons was putting enormous trust into his master gunner's hand and waited for the gunner to start firing. Gibbons was making a big gamble. Only 4 of the Robin's cannons were in range of the Spanish sloop. Below deck, Isaac was loading the gunpowder in the barrel with a ladle and watched as the other gunner's mates loaded a 12-pound ball. A loud metal-on-metal screech pierced Isaac's ears as the ball was shoved down with a ramrod. The master gunner then used his gunner's gimlet and poked it into the vent on the cannon to make it ready for the priming powder. He then broke open his dry powder bag and used the powder horn to prime the seat. He carefully loaded the priming quill, which was really a spirit-soaked wick, into the gun tube and down into the powder. The master gunner lined up the cannon, aimed it high at the Spanish sloop's mast, and took the smoldering linstock from his gunner's mate. He moved out of the path of the recoil and blew on the slow match of the linstock until it was bright orange. The master gunner turned the linstock sideways and lit the quill. Calls quietly went out under deck to light the wicks of the other cannons. Isaac had tied rags over his ears to protect from the deafening blast of the cannon, but still covered his ears. Even Isaac, with his hulking mass, was blown a step backwards from the violent concussive force of the explosion. Gray smoke blinded all 3 men manning the gun, while the master gunner immediately ordered a reload. 2 other explosions were heard from the belly of the Robin. At the sounds of the first volley, Captain Gibbons turned the ship's bow hard and started to make an expedient escape. 5 Spanish cannon shots rang out in return. Crewmen of the Robin screamed as they picked up the hidden weapons from the deck and began firing. A gray fog hung between the 2 ships. The Spanish privateers took 2 hits across the deck. One fantastic shot hit the poop deck and damaged the helm. The other shot missed the mast and just skimmed across the deck. One shot missed completely, and another cannon never even fired because of damp powder. In return, the Robin took considerably more damage. One of the jib sails was ripped completely off. A hole was punched into the galley, and one of the Quaker cannons on the deck was hit and blown off into the sea. Men were firing muskets with little luck. Both sides missed just about everything they fired at. The battle scene grew quiet as both sides focused on reloading. The Robin turned away hard, and the sloop did not match its movements. The Spanish vessel's steering wheel no longer worked, and they were already drifting aimlessly. Isaac frantically wormed and then swabbed the cannon, so not to pour gunpowder down a smoldering barrel. Another gunner mate then hastily ladled powder down the barrel. Isaac then loaded the cannon with another ball, and the gunner's mate rammed it into place. The master gunner repeated his last ritual and readied the fuse, aimed, and lit the wick. He took careful aim this time, trying to time the rise and fall of both ships. The master gunner knew this would be his last chance from this cannon before the angle of attack changed too much. All 3 men covered their ears, closed their eyes, and prayed for a direct hit. A deafening crack filled the compartment, and the cannon blew backwards. A loud creaking and crash could be heard from the Spanish sloop. As the smoke cleared, Isaac could see the Spanish's vessel mast, hanging akilter and wailing in the wind. "Fantastic shot! You shiver the timbers!" the gunner's mate yelled in excitement. "Huzzah! Huzzah!" The 3 men cheered wildly, not believing the lucky shot they landed. Up on deck, cheers from the Robin could be heard as they watched the sloop's mast flail in the wind. The Robin now completed its turn, so only the stern was a target to the sloop as it made its hasty getaway. The 2 ships exchanged gunfire with not much avail. It seemed both crews' gunners were very inaccurate. The Spanish vessel soon became a small shadow until it finally was swallowed by the horizon. The crew of the Robin was in a mad rush to make a repair. Captain Gibbons knew he had to increase the distance between himself and the Spanish privateers as fast as possible. He knew the Spanish ship would already be rigging up a makeshift jolly mast out of the shattered one. Patrick and the master carpenter busily jumped to work patching up the damaged galley. Sam Scurvy was covered with blood and had a large cooking fork sticking out of his shoulder. He was ignoring the large fork and trying to clean his galley. Patrick summated that he was still in battle shock and could not feel the pain of the skewer yet. "Samuel, don't forget that pot in the corner there," Patrick pointed. As Sam's scurvy turned, Patrick made his move and yanked the fork free. With the tearing of the flesh, a large splash of blood showered them both. Sam Scurvy howled, and then stared at the large fork in Patrick's hand and said, That's where that fork be." Mr. McLean insisted that Patrick take Samuel to the surgeon's chest and clean the wound with spirits. As Patrick was treating Samuel, Seamus crashed into the room. "Fuck you two! Why aren't you looking for Brian?" Seamus yelled. Who's Brian again?" Patrick questioned. "Where's he?" "He be a gunner's mate," Seamus belted back. "And if I fucking knew where he was, you goat fucker, I wouldn't be inquiring. We think he got blown into the drink when the Quaker cannon blew off." "We'll be there as soon as I finish defestering this lesion," Patrick replied. Seamus stormed out as noisily as he could with a string of Irish obscenities. Brian would never be found as the days passed. The crew still kept looking long after the Robin was patched back up. Still uneasy from battle with the Spanish privateers, the crew continued to nervously scan the horizon for days after the attack. A few days out at open sea, the captain finally relaxed and turned his command back over to the quartermaster, Mr. Mandrick. They would not have to worry about pirates again until they closed in on Savannah.